Welcome to Schweitzer Drive, a podcast where we explore what goes on between the generation of electricity and the light switch. Join Dave Whitehead as he interviews the entrepreneurs, innovators, and experts who are inventing the future of electric power.
Hi, I'm Dave Whitehead, Chief Executive Officer at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, and today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has been a focus of several of our past episodes. We've talked with Dr. Ed Schweitzer about his challenges to SEL engineers to define and develop solutions that are inherently cyber secure. We've talked with cybersecurity experts from companies like Dragos and Juniper Networks about the work they are doing to safeguard civilization. Cybersecurity has become an ever-present fact of life in our increasingly digital world, and it is something that demands our constant attention. Today, we're going to come at the topic from a slightly different angle that is less about technology and more about people and processes. My guest is SEL's VP of Security, Frank Harrill. Frank Harrill is the VP of Security here at SEL. He retired from the FBI in 2016, where he devoted over 20 years to the investigation of sophisticated cyber attacks, terrorist incidents, and other federal crimes. Prior to joining the FBI, he served in the United States Navy for nearly 10 years as a carrier pilot and jet flight instructor. In 2011, Frank earned a master's degree in information technology with an emphasis in security and assurance from Carnegie Mellon University. Hi, Frank, and thanks for joining us today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
This is going to be a really fun discussion because in previous cyber discussions, we've really talked about the tools and the technologies of it. But if you start mapping out where to a lot of your, probably most, I don't know what the statistics are, but where most of the cyber challenges, it's from the people and the processes, not the technology. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. You joined SEL in 2016, and while SEL has always been a company that has good security habits, you've really helped us implement world-class security systems and processes from both a physical and information technology standpoint. Can you talk a little bit about your background and how that has informed your approach at SEL?
Coming from the FBI, I was fortunate to be able to see the broad spectrum of enterprises, corporations, companies, even individuals, and how cybersecurity was afforded resources, talent, and emphasis. And I was very fortunate to be able to work at SEL, where cybersecurity and security as a whole has been emphasized since its founding by Dr. Schweitzer in the early 80s. So that's an automatic advantage for SEL. But the threat landscape is changing. What I've seen, what we've all seen over the last 2 decades is an incredible acceleration in threat velocity, sophistication. And today we're dealing with a threat, as we all know, that our parents and grandparents never even foresaw. And that is a criminal adversary, a state-sponsored adversary, and the blending of the two that can reach out and touch the average company, even the average citizen, from a world away with incredible ease, low cost of effort, and almost marginally zero cost in terms of the ability to spread that malicious intent across this broad population in a way that we've never contemplated before.
Yeah, it's interesting when it comes to cyber and the let's call it the rationales behind cyber incidents. There's just criminals, the criminal, you probably dealt a lot with that in the FBI. There's the state-sponsored stuff, right, where it's just, this is how governments get up in the morning and direct their citizens to behave. And you're right, this is something that we've never seen. Certainly our parents never experienced. We're kind of old guys. We're relatively new to this, and our kids are going to have to be. Maybe on a tangent too. Is I saw in the Wall Street Journal, I forgot who was calling for it. I think it was who's the CEO of Google was calling for the effect of the implementation of a Geneva Convention for cyber. How are we as countries in the world going to interact or expect behavior? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a noble thought, and I think we would all be glad if that worked. But I think what we've seen today is the application of cyber force projection is really a method of asymmetric warfare, and it's not going to be easily detached from nation states like North Korea, even Russia, which is not the superpower it once was, but it can be through the application of cyber power, if you will. So while I think that's, again, kind of a pie in the sky effort, wouldn't certainly discourage it to the extent I could, but I don't think it's going to be any measure by which we can let up our defensive and even in some cases offensive efforts to dominate that space, because it is here to stay. It is a force to be reckoned with. And by that I mean, and you mentioned something interesting, and that is, we all as human beings like to bucketize threats, and I used to do that in presentations. Hacktivist threat, the criminal threat, the nation state threat, but today they've blended. And today we're seeing, even when we see ransomware as a service groups, what that likely is, and I think really beyond the shadow of a doubt, is a blending of some state-sponsored efforts. We all know the countries in play here, with criminal enterprises, and it's a gray kind of a mercenary market. And again, that is something that we never really have seen with the focus and acuity that we can see it today.
Yeah, I don't think some of these nation states we're talking about are turning a blind eye, right? It's just they're condoning such let's call it bad behavior.
Either tacitly approving or actually funding and using criminal groups, what we would call criminal groups, as proxies for their national goals.
Getting back on to focus where our topic is for this episode, because this podcast is about everything that happens between the generation of electric power and the light switch in your home, what does this topic, enterprise security, have to do with keeping the lights on in from your perspective? Yeah,
I'm going to suggest that it has a lot to do with keeping the lights on, because what we have seen, and we've seen it, with the Colonial Pipeline attack, JBS meets, that's not electric power, but it's the same kind of a threat, and that is that it doesn't need to be kinetic. A cyber threat, a cyber actor can interrupt even IT systems and disrupt whether it's billing or distribution of energy, whatever the case may be. This is vital to the way that we live today, and the electric power that really forms the social fabric in a way that allows us to live the lives we enjoy. So cybersecurity throughout the electric grid is incredibly important and increasingly under attack, and under attack in ways that aren't necessarily direct attacks on a transformer or, some implanted component type of attack, but they can be attacks on the periphery on systems that are just as important to the overall system as the actual grid mechanics itself.
At SEL, we invent, design, and build equipment that's used to protect, monitor, and control critical infrastructure. So it's easy to understand why security is extremely important to us. We see events like the pipeline in the news not every day, thank goodness, but certainly very, very frequently. And whether we're talking about safeguarding our supply chain, protecting our IP, or other operating systems, can you talk about why creating a culture of security is so important for every phase of our business and enterprise?
I think you hit on that topic very well in the opening, and that is that the human element, the human operator, is just as much a part of the system as any transistorized, microprocessor. And at the end of the day, and that's something we preach, here at SEL, and that is our employee owners, our colleagues are the first and last line of defense, and they're likely the most attacked. Not likely, they are the most attacked operator in the system, component in that system, because again, what we're talking about, and that is an element that can reach out, whether it's by email, which is the most common vector, even by phone, sometimes by mail, that can reach out and touch each and every one of us in a way that can be beguiling, convincing, have a sense of urgency, and cause us to do things because of an innate desire to please or perform, things that we would not normally do, whether that is activate a system, deactivate a system, cause a funds transfer, cause a release of information. All of those things you have to continually train. You have to train like you fight, to use a military phraseology. And they have to, our colleagues need to see how that comes at them in a training environment so they know how to react when it hits them for real. Because no sensor system, no defensive system, whether that's an email filter, whatever the case may be, is ever going to be 100% effective. It's a constant arms race, and those threats will make it through that sensor fabric, if you will, and reach the human.
We started off talking about, we can always install more security devices or put more equipment in place. But as we mentioned earlier, a lot comes down to people and processes. And, we're fortunate enough. We've always taken cybersecurity very, very seriously. In fact, we created your group specifically to help safeguard not only our business operation, but the products we're supplying and deploying to our customers for critical infrastructure. Do you have any thoughts or guidance or input? We're a very large company, 5,300 people around the world. What if I'm a startup, a company of 50 people, 10 people, or what advice do you, since we talked about people being the biggest problem, what are some of the simple things we might be able to do to help protect our enterprise or our small organization?
That's a really interesting point. And from our vantage point, we see how important it is because we deal with thousands of suppliers and even local businesses. And we see the extent to which they are impacted by cyber attacks, by compromise, by email takeover, whatever the case may be, whatever variant of attack and that is, unfortunately very successful today. But something that has long been emphasized at SCL are first principles. This really is two things. It's a team sport and it's not that complicated, although it can be made complicated by complex standards and hundreds of controls that companies must have in place. And while all that's true, a few things matter, the most, and that is knowing your assets, knowing your attack surface, knowing what you have deployed in the field in terms of information resources, whether those are endpoints, whether those are servers, what those look like from the outside, what an attacker is going to see, keeping those up to date and patched. Ensuring that multi-factor authentication protects anything, especially anything that is publicly exposed and preferably internally as well. And then finally, ensuring that the workforce is thoroughly trained, and it can't be one and done. It's never one and done. It has to be continuous. It has to be weekly, monthly, annually. All of those things together can make an enterprise far more secure than the basically what we see today as the norm.
Yeah, I think you're probably spot on with that training. Even if you're a very, very small organization, say a handful of people, you have to identify, I think, somebody that's responsible for the security. And then, as you pointed, train as you fight. And, and kind of an anecdote is a few weeks ago, I got an email from one of our great suppliers. I know the person, I got an email from supposedly a person I know really, really well. They were asking me about a contract and a payment, and it's like, it looked really, really good. I could have expected from this person something similar to the email I got. The caveat though is I'd never issue recs or checks or something like that. So for somebody to send me something like that is kind of out of the ordinary, maybe not too far out of the ordinary. And I, since it felt a little bit weird, just a little bit, I forwarded on to you and your security group. You guys checked it out, and one of our suppliers' email accounts had been compromised, and it was really, really sophisticated. And you know what? 5 years ago, 6 years ago, so maybe I wouldn't have thought too much about it, but you guys have done such a good job of, I can expect some kind of training event to come in my email, like a spoofing event, phishing event, whatever it might be, about every month. So I'm always on guard these days about it. And I think that to your point is, there are little things you can do like this, testing the employees once a month, whether you're a big organization or a large organization, to get that cadence, that muscle memory, if you will, going. So kudos to you and your team. That is fabulous. Otherwise, I think we'd be in a lot more trouble every day than we are.
Well, no, thank you. And we're fortunate to have the resources to do that from you and the other members of the executive team. But I'll say this, and that is, it doesn't require the resources of a large enterprise to foster that type of culture and that training effort. The other thing I'm going to say is something that is invaluable today, and I could see it, or I think any FBI agent's going to echo this too, and that is vigilance has to be 24/7, especially when it comes to cyber. And the reason for that is right back to what we talked about at the beginning, and that is this is a threat group or groups for, that have a worldwide presence. Time zones mean nothing. And these threats will come at enterprises, even individuals, 24 hours a day, and no longer can this be a 9 to 5 effort. Think about going back to the parent-grandparent analogy. A bank robbery is going to happen generally when the bank is open, maybe opening, closing. You might have had burglaries or something before, but that was a different set of controls that were applied overnight. No longer is that the case. So what you have to do today as a small, medium, or even large, or certainly a large business, is have a 24/7 monitoring system so that threats can't basically metastasize overnight or on the weekend or on holidays. It needs to be 24/7, 365.
Now, is that expensive? If I'm a small organization, I just heard 24/7, 365, and all I can think of, man, that's a big operating expense.
It can be, and it can be as expensive as you make it. But at the same time, there are even services, and you have to be careful with some of those in terms of managed service providers. But there is a way at a relatively low cost, and certainly less than the alternative, which is compromise and breach, to make that happen, even for a sole proprietorship. But end of the day, the story is rapidity of response matters. What we try to do at SEL is something that was popularized by CrowdStrike, but that is get an analyst's eyes on a threat within 1 minute, take action within 10, full eradication within 60. If you don't do that, then what you're going to allow an attacker to do over time eventually is to move laterally in an enterprise, basically spread presence. And if that is allowed to occur, then you have a far more difficult problem than you would have had on the front end.
Hey, what are your thoughts then about, say, desktop exercises determine, can you detect in a minute? Can you respond in 10 minutes? And can you eradicate in 60 minutes? Is that useful? Are there tools out there for doing something like that? Or?
Yeah, there are. And the importance of even basic tabletop exercises really cannot be overstated. And also codifying the lessons learned and results of exercises like that, and understanding what you may have to do in a large scale incident. Do you have a process for changing every password in an enterprise? That's a really tough thing to do. It's tougher than it sounds. Even when I just say it, it sounds like, well, I'll just change them. It's actually much more difficult than that. How would you do it at scale quickly? How do you communicate that if your systems are unavailable? All those things have to be planned in advance. And if they're not, when an actual incident happens, you'll find yourself in a real predicament, having to build that jet as you fly it. The time to think about that is long before.
Yeah, when I was younger, I used to think these tabletop exercises were kind of contrived and maybe I don't know, a waste of time. As I've gotten older and seen the benefit of these exercises. While the exercise itself may be a little bit contrived, the fact that you know who to call when there's an emergency, right? You have the playbook established already. I think it can't be understated how valuable that having a playbook is when something bad happens.
And plan for the unavailability of systems that we rely upon, that we've come to really the fabric of our daily existence. But if you don't have the very system that you're responding to in terms of a breach, that it also can be a tremendous challenge in terms of communication and coordination. If the system that you rely upon to do that is the thing that's in peril, then that's a real problem.
I know you've been really involved with what is referred to as GridX, and for those not familiar with GridX, it's a tabletop exercise, but it involves utilities and manufacturers and the government, and a lot goes on. An event is thought up, and it goes on for a couple of days. But what I've been really impressed with is it gets everybody at the table at one time before something really seriously in the real world happens. We can practice. Who do I call? What actions are going to be taken? I know you've been really involved from the SEL side. So following on just a little bit, a critical aspect of our security system is working closely with customers and suppliers, even the government entities too that have jurisdictions over various parts of our critical infrastructure to share potential threats, opportunities, and for improvements. Can you talk about how this plays out? From your perspective, and why it is important, or maybe there's some things that are not as important as others.
No, I think exercises like GridX, and it's one thing to do an internal exercise where the confines and contours of the system that you're defending, the systems that you are ensuring the continuity of. It's a whole nother aspect to take that one or several levels above that and understand how all this is going to interlock. If you had, for instance, a SolarWinds style supply chain breach of some type like that, what is that communication going to be? Can you even do that without tapping external partners? The answer is probably no. And you are going to get government attention whether you want to or not. And so that's why, and this is easy for us. We've always had a great relationship with our government partners in terms of collaboration, in terms of incident response. But having those relationships ahead of time, at least knowing who to call, knowing what the phone numbers are, knowing you're not going to get lost in a call tree, that is imperative. And you'd be surprised. I think most folks would be surprised to learn how receptive agencies like the FBI are to establishing that, basic liaison, so that that's not a new thing. If there is a problem in terms of a compromise or attack of some kind, you know who to call and have that relationship pre-built to smooth what could be troubled waters.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head with the relationships that are pre-built. It is so important to have those names and numbers in your Rolodex prior to something happening. So you'd eventually probably find the right person, but that could to call to mitigate a problem, but it would probably take days or something like that, right? Having this all pre-worked out, I think is brilliant.
But you touched on something else, and that is and I'll go back to it, and that's the importance of relationships, training, and understanding people, because you can spend unlimited amount on security systems, and some have great effectiveness. Some tend to veer into hyperbole and even snake oil, but training and a culture of security, it really has to be the root and the heart of any effective security program. And I would also note, you mentioned it, physical security too. Physical security, you don't have cybersecurity without physical security. If you have physical access to a device or to a network, then it's very difficult and maybe impossible to defend it. So all those things interlock, but they don't have to be that complicated, and they really don't have to be incredibly expensive compared to the alternative. And calibrating that resource allocation is the key.
Frank, if you had to offer up a suggestion for maybe one or two things an organization could do to get them to 70% or 60%, 80% being secure, are there any tips or tricks that you'd recommend?
One is work with vendors, work with your suppliers, but in terms of, I won't name names, but you cannot rely that what you're being sold out of the box is secure enough. Meaning that, an Office 365 configuration, the tools are there. For instance, with Microsoft Secure Score, the tools are there to harden that configuration, but out of the box, never take for granted that what you're supplied is good enough. And you just talked about a valued SEL customer that was compromised probably because of that reliance on, this is the way it came, it must be good enough, but it's not. And then I would offer back to the basics, back to essentials. Look at a control set like the CIS. I think now it's the top 18 controls. Make sure you have the fundamentals bases covered, and then annotate that one by one. That's not complicated. But there are resources out there that are free, from NIST, from CISA, that can help any small business to massive enterprise, conquer what can seem to be a daunting threat.
Yeah, it's, there's been a shift certainly to cloud, and there's a lot of good reason to do it. One of those being, security. You have one place that you have to manage, say your email or whatever it might be, your other business tools. And I probably agree with that, right? It's a central place. But as you just pointed out, is you can't take things for granted. You still have to do your homework in terms of setting up your right security posture, configuring it correctly. Otherwise, you are going to be compromised. You're probably in a worse position putting it in the cloud and not taking care of the security features than keeping it on-prem and probably doing maybe not as good a job on your security side.
And watching the margins, watching the siren song of remote access, whether that's an insecure VPN device or appliance, whether that is RDP, remote desktop protocol that's exposed, or some remote desktop application like TeamViewer, whatever the case may be. understand what you're exposing, secure what you're exposing, and be deliberate about always understand that is a huge risk lever. And attackers always make their gains in the seams, in the margins, in the forgotten areas. And then there are tools out there that some of which cost nothing to enumerate that surface, so that you want to basically define what you have out there, so that you can harden it. But if you don't know it's there, it's impossible to defend.
Yeah. It's going to continue to be a fight, something we need to keep our eye on. Cyber is not going away. We love certainly all the benefits it brings to us, but there's a responsibility to ensure our systems are safe. To quote the phrase, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, right? I think we need to keep that in mind continually. Frank, this has been a great conversation on cybersecurity. I love the fact that people are probably the biggest challenge in cybersecurity, and that, as you pointed out, that keeping a focus on it, training and practicing, I think takes you a long way to being cyber secure. Thanks again, and I look forward to having you back on a future podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for stopping by Schweitzer Drive. Join us again as we learn about, explore, and celebrate electric power. For more information about the show, please visit selinc.com/Schweitzer Drive.